anything there, gentlemen? Hello and welcome to tonight's Pub Theology. Glad to have you with us tonight as we get started in a conversation that I think I've been looking forward to probably for several weeks now, ever since I got word that Matt Whitman from the 10-Minute Bible Hour was going to join us. I'm really excited about the conversation. Thanks for being here tonight, Matt. We're going to let you introduce yourself in just a second, but I want to explain to all of our viewers, those who are not familiar with Pub Theology, what this is and why they're watching this. This is a chance for us to just come to the table, enjoy some good beverages and some great conversation about deep truth, to try to dive as deep as we can on some things that maybe people have asked a lot of questions about. Maybe we just need to have a good conversation about to help us better understand. If you are a believer and you have been part of a church and you're thinking, why does it matter what denomination I belong to? That's what we're going to try and answer tonight, have a conversation about that. And if you're not a Christian, if you are saying, hey, you know what, my friend shared this, I don't really know what this is all about, but I'm interested in this question, thank you for being here. We're really glad that you're a part of this, that we have a chance to help you. Maybe this will help answer a few questions you've had as well over the years. Pub Theology is just this online conversation. You're going to see us talking, but we really want to invite you guys who are watching to join in the conversation. So as we talk, feel free to chime in the chat, make a comment, drop a question, drop a thought. We'll try and work that in as much as we can into the conversation here. We also have some people who are here in the pub with us tonight over in our viewing room. And looks like they're, as I glance over that way, it looks like they're having a little bit of problems, technical issues. So we'll see if Taylor over there can solve their issues. Otherwise, if not, well, they'll be all right. So glad that they're here with us, and anybody who joins us in the pub is always welcome to stay after for the after show. We have a nice long conversation with you guys as well. So as we go through this conversation, once again, feel free to chime in the comments. We are happy to have you here. This is actually an old tradition for people, right? About 500 years ago, Martin Luther was really big on this idea of spending time around the table with people, enjoying a beverage and having deep theological conversations. But I think even before Luther did this, I think it's just kind of always something people did, right? Sit around a table at a pub and talk about like solving the world's problems. That's just kind of how people did stuff. So here we are. I'm going to do a round of introductions if you don't know those of us on the screen here. My name is Brandon. I am on staff at St. Mark Ministries in Green Bay and also your host of the Pub Theology live stream here. Hey, Ben, why don't you introduce yourself for a second?
Ben Workentine. I'm the discipleship pastor and campus pastor at our Green Bay campus at St. Mark Ministries, and I am the one trying to experiment with a lot of things tonight in the StreamYard. So if things don't work, well, you can point them at me. It's my fault.
That guy.
Yeah. So I'm an experimenter. I'm a learner. In fact, wait a minute, everybody. Wait a minute.
Oh, he's
Check
going to pull
this
something
out.
out. He's going to pull something
I'm
out.
here introducing myself as a professional learner and experimenter.
Nice.
Here we go. We'll see if it works.
All right. Mike.
Hi. I'm waiting to see what my background is before I say anything. Oh, there we go. Michael, or Mike, either one is fine. The Congregational Life Minister at St. Mark Ministries. I do life with so many different people, specifically new people in our worship setting, in our church family, whatever that looks like. How can I do life with them so that they can do life with Jesus and with our church and use their spiritual gifts and a lot of good things.
Cool. Very cool. Ashley, why don't you introduce yourself for a second?
Hello, I'm Ashley Peterson. I am the intern. I get the privilege of spending my last semester of college at St. Mark, just kind of doing a little bit of everything.
Very cool. Very cool. We're glad to have you with us, Ashley. And she's tuning in remotely, but we're still glad that she's a part of this. And now I'm going to introduce our guest, Matt, in just a moment. But I want to just give a quick explanation as to why we asked Matt to be part of this. See, most of us were on staff at a Lutheran church. We follow a Lutheran tradition. And when we considered this question of why does your denomination matter, I kind of thought, if we all just sat around as a bunch of Lutherans talking about why our denomination matters, we'd say, well, you should just be Lutheran, and that's what matters. And that seems like that's a little self-serving. And so I thought, well, let's bring in a guy who isn't a Lutheran, but who also has talked to Lutherans as well as Catholics and a lot of other people over the years, and has really, I think, spoken into the faith lives of a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and kind of get his perspective on that. So Matt, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Is this working? I get it set up right? Because I was scrambling.
That's great. Yeah.
Whoa, I feel good about that. It would have been embarrassing if I do this for a living. I can't make a microphone work. It's happened before. My name's Matt Whitman. I live in Rapid City, South Dakota. I'm just generally from the American West. I have a smudge on my camera, so it's going to lock focus and lose focus literally all night. I'm super sorry about that. And yes, it'll drive me a little crazy too, but these things are hard to solve. And so
we're glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm a longtime evangelical free church pastor. I went to Trinity and Ted's Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Chicago for education, and then at some point along the line, I started putting stuff on the internet, and for whatever reason, some people started to watch it, and then more people started to watch it, and bizarrely and inexplicably, this is now what I do.
Well, I'll tell you what, Matt, for about the last 2 years, I have been listening to your podcast, and I am like way behind, I think, because you've been doing the book of Matthew, and I think I'm on chapter 2, verse 4. Maybe I'm on, I think I'm in the Sermon on the Mount now, but you're taking your time. Because I look at your most recent podcast, you're still in Matthew.
We will get this done at some point, and I'm in no rush. I love this book. I'm having fun. We just did like a 3-week, 15-day jaunt into the story of the temple in the Old Testament, and it's a wonderful format for being able to do this. Just 10 minutes a day, every weekday, and you just get what you get. And yeah, reach the end of the time, and well, that's where we stop, and we'll see what it is tomorrow. So it's pretty fun.
I absolutely love it, though. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, somebody should do the book of Mark, and Matt's never going to get there, so maybe I should do it.
Matt, I think you have a cool chair, so we need to up our game here.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah, this thing, check this out. I'm not going to plug it in, but this thing massages your back. It's like for super lazy video gamers. It's got this little plug here. If you plug it into your computer, it just sits there and vigorously vibrates your lower back, which actually feels like trash. It seemed like it'd be the coolest feature ever. And I got it, and I got it all set up, and I plugged the thing in. I was like, this is stupid. It feels awful.
Massage.
Never doing this again. Yeah, I got suckered.
So not worth the cash, apparently, is what you're telling me. Oh, man, that's too bad.
Also, computer chair reviews here on Pub Theology.
Right. That's what we're really
here exactly for. One. This one, right? It's terrible.
Well, we're going to be talking about denominations tonight, and I want to start by just maybe defining our terms a little bit, just to make sure that anybody who's watching this, especially if maybe you grew up in a church that didn't really talk about denomination, maybe you're non-denominational and you're like, yeah, my church is non-denominational, and I don't know what that means. that's why I'm here. But there are other people who just say, you know what, I've gone to a lot of different kinds of churches and I've never really figured out exactly why this mattered to anybody. So let's start with some terms. I think sometimes people feel like it's maybe a negative term. Sometimes the term denominationalism gets used as sort of a swear word. So what do we mean? What is the definition of denomination? Let's talk about that a little bit here. And I'm going to let Matt kind of speak first, I think, just because he's our guest tonight.
Yeah, sounds good. Denomination, it does exactly what the name says it does. It denominates, it assigns a name to a thing. So in a way, the word denomination kind of does what a good brand does in terms of differentiating two similar things within a market. I mean, a brand originally refers to literally that piece of metal that you jam onto the back of your cow so that the ranchers who are all using the same open range know, oh, that cow's marked with my thing. It looks just like that other cow, but that one's marked with a different thing. They're very similar. This differentiates. Likewise, denominations help people tell the difference between things that otherwise look really similar. Because if we assume historical, creedal, orthodox Christianity, that is people who can say the creeds, who are naming the exact same precisely described deity who is who is in depth described in the creeds, then you go and look at a bunch of denominations, and if you don't have a bunch of time to dig deep into it, it might all just look like the same thing, but it's not the same thing. There's a reason that all these different groups exist. There were historical pressures, there were regional pressures, there were linguistic pressures, there were theological crises that happened. There's a reason that each and every one of these groups exist. Some of those reasons are maybe a touch more valid than others, but hey, here we all are now. So how do you tell the difference between a group of free Lutherans who are a part of a free church movement in the late 19th century in Sweden and a group of free Lutherans who were a part of that same movement, but who partnered up with people from Denmark and Norway as well in Missouri in the 1950s? Well, you call one the Free Lutheran Church and you call one the Evangelical Free Church of America. They're very similar, but denominations is a quick way to put a tag on what group came from what story, what place. And as a result, it lets the person who's trying to figure out who they're talking to have some quick sense of, this is this group that's a part of this part of the family tree. So first and foremost, denomination is just a descriptor of whichever batch of Christians you're talking to right now.
So you use the term family tree, and what I think I'm understanding then is denomination is kind of a way of saying, like, who's the weird uncle, right?
Yeah, maybe so.
But honestly, that was really great because, your mention of Lutherans, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I think we have a lot of Lutherans who watch us because we're part of a church that's got a Lutheran tradition. So a lot of our Lutheran brothers and sisters watch us. Yeah, and I think you might have a better understanding of Lutheran history than many Lutherans do, Matt. So I think you're bringing a lot to the table just in that.
I don't know about that. It's been fun to learn about. And I mean, the resume in the school, that stuff, it doesn't matter that much because you can learn all of this stuff anywhere. If you want to pay a bunch of money and have a fancy institution teach you the stuff, you can go that route. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in my 20s initially, but a little bit of time in school, and I realized my favorite thing is when I sit down with someone who's brilliant and they explain how we went from this thing way back here in history to this thing way up here. How did these ideas evolve into what they are right now? And that was sort of the first step for me in becoming really empathetic and appreciative of how much those stories factor into understanding another Christian tradition, into understanding a denomination, since that's a term we're using. Almost none of these things just happened because some guy went out in his garage and was sad and bored one day and was like, I'm just going to make a new version of church. Those are cults. We don't call those denominations because they don't name the creedal God, and they're talking about something different than the God of Abraham. Those things that start that way are Christian adjacent and might have some likable features. But just, again, as a simple point of denomination, if you can't say the creeds, you're doing something different than historical Christianity. And that's a matter of taxonomy, not even judgment. But through that time, learning about Lutheranism, for example, and the other big 7 or 8 groups that everybody's heard of, what you start to figure out as you hear the stories is that these people aren't crazy. They weren't just super mad and melted down and threw a temper tantrum. There were a ton of factors that are an elaborate, interesting, fascinating story with colorful characters and all of these moves and tragedies and failures and the horrible moments and glowing optimistic moments that led to a point where somebody did the thing that is not the easy thing, and that is they identified themselves as a distinct branch on the Christian family tree as opposed to a part of a different branch on the Christian family tree. And if you know somebody's story a little bit, they don't seem as crazy to you. And empathy, Christian empathy, is much easier. And it's much easier to be like, oh, well, here's all the stuff we have in common. Now we can have a laugh about the stuff we don't.
I really love that, Matt, because I think that what happens all too often, and I try to encourage people not to think this way, but we kind of look at people who are on the other side of a denominational fence and we're like, well, they're the opponent, they're the enemy. And I think, you know, when you talk about like history, I think that there's a lot of history behind that, because when we were establishing churches in America, you know, everybody was Christian. And so the biggest challenge was what kind of Christian are you? And does your branch of Christianity kind of prove a threat to my branch of Christianity? But now we live in a world where I think all of us as Christians, the biggest threat is not Christianity. It's the lies of the devil that come in so many other ways. I kind of always picture it like sometimes in churches, we stand at the door holding the door closed while our Christian brother is knocking on the other side saying, hey, let's just have a conversation. And meanwhile, you know, pornography and just post-truthism and all this stuff is kind of crawling in the windows and we're just ignoring it. And so I think it's time for us to at least have the conversation. That doesn't mean that we ignore the differences, but it means that we actually have to be willing to come to the table and talk.
My next video is about exactly this. It's funny because normally you just kind of sit down, you make the video. It's not that hard. You've been talking with people for a long time. If it has some blemishes, it doesn't matter. Just be a human. Say the thing you meant to say. Shut up and get out. It's not that tough to do YouTube stuff. But every now and then I've got one where I'm like, all right, I've got this limited attention span from people. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I'm asking them to go somewhere with me here. I'm going to record this as many times as it takes until this is the way I want it to be. And I've been wearing this stupid shirt and running this stupid video for 2 straight days, all day. This thing just reeks. It smells like cabbage and old pumpkins and stuff because the lights are real bright and you get real sweaty. But all I'm trying to do right now is make a simple sub 10-minute video that calls for exactly what you're talking about, Brandon. What is the new ethic of Christian unity going to be? Because the way we're thinking about each other right now and the way we've thought about each other for the last hundreds of years, it ain't going to work. We no longer have that luxury. We cannot just assume that everybody is in a place where, oh, well, we're all grappling with what to do with Jesus and which kind should I sign up for, which brand of Christianity. No, something far worse is happening than that. Nobody thinks about us at all. Nobody cares at all. It's irrelevant. We are in a post-even think about it moment, and we're still in this place where we're acting like we're holding our institutions out as though like everybody owes us something. Nobody owes us anything. We have not earned that. We figured out how to say the gospel to people in the mid-1950s, and that generation that came before us that figured that out, they're rock stars. That's awesome that they figured out how to say it in the mid-20th century, post-Holocaust, post-World War II. And then we kept trying to say it that way with diminishing returns every single year since, to the point that those returns diminished so much that all we're really left with is go on the internet and throw out hot takes about how stupid and bad other Christians are to get views that don't do anything other than cause harm to what we're trying to accomplish, and then wonder why people are completely indifferent to the truest, realist thing ever. Like the gospel, the kingdom, its values, it answers every question that society has right now. Everything that hurts, the people are saying on Twitter and Facebook and everything that's burning down on the news and everything else, the values of the kingdom, like it solves it all. And all we have to do is just put it out there and be like, look, oh, here's actually this thing. Like this answers the questions that you have. But we can't get out of our own way because we're married to a bunch of stuff that made sense, and it did make sense in the mid-20th century. And since then, we have failed the test of the age of the internet. We have not come together in an era that requires coming together to figure out how to say the message of the kingdom to planet Earth, to our moment in history, in a way that will simply make sense to them so that they can understand what it is and why it is truth and life and goodness. And so one of the biggest hurdles, I've done a ton of research on this firsthand, trying to figure out why people don't like what we are and don't think about what we are. One of the biggest hurdles is, like, even if I signed up for your weird God, which version is even right? You guys hate each other. Like, I'm not willing to go through the hassle of learning this entire field and figuring out whose argument is right about what. You got these people shrieking about stuff on YouTube. Those people are super mad over there. Like, I don't want yelling about God and stuff. I don't know. It'd be easier just to not do it. If we cannot figure out some notion of a new ethic of how to move forward together, we got serious, serious problems. But if we do figure it out, it's going to be amazing, because there's going to be redemption in society, and the things that feel broken and unfixable right now are going to get fixed because of the transformative effect of the values of the kingdom. And Jesus of Nazareth and the God of Abraham is going to get credit for that, and the world's going to be transformed. We sit on this pivot point where if we can get our act together with each other, that latter reality that I'm describing, it's in play. That's happened before. We just got to figure out the most basic thing, which is what Jesus prayed for. John 17, pray for those who are going to believe because of their message, that they would love one another and that they would be one as you and I, Jesus and the Father, are one, so that the world will know that we're one. Jesus himself said if we can figure this out, the world is going to know. The world's going to see the gospel lived out, and they're going to respond to it. So it's not a key topic. It's a little nicer because it makes me feel sad when people leave mean YouTube comments. Nah, bring it on. I've been doing this for a long time. What I'm driving at is, like, now this is what we need to figure out right now in order for the gospel to make sense to the world. And if you care about your lost and dying neighbors who do not know this truth, then one of the biggest things that you can do right now is figure out a new ethic for how to think of other Christians who name the same God. That was a lot. Thank you for your patience.
Well, you can tell a podcaster when he knows how to just keep going, like, without that stuff. So for sure. But you know what? Actually, there are a lot of things that you said there, and you used the kind of the phrase, married to, and I don't remember exactly the words you used after that, but it sparked for me. Ben, Mike, what does our senior pastor always say? What is his kind of like, uses a married to phrase, right?
Yeah. Mildly date the method.
Yeah, right. A lot of times the problem ends up becoming that we're so married to our brand identity. Like you were saying, Matt, I'm so married to what it means to be a Lutheran. I'm so married to what distinguishes me that I forget that the mission is to make disciples.
Yes.
That's where it starts.
Yeah.
So a lot of good things there. Before we move on, I want to kind of tackle this other little bit that's maybe a nuance to this, but I think it's really important. And I think it's important because I had a conversation once with a guy. This was in a church I was serving in another state, but I remember having a conversation with him. I was actually encouraging him because he was discontent with things that we were doing at our church. And I encouraged him to go to the other Lutheran church that was part of our church body across town. And his response was, "What? No, I was taught you don't change your religion. I'm not going to do that." And I had to realize, okay, he doesn't understand what the difference between religion, denomination, church body, all that stuff is. Right. When we talk about denominations, why are we not talking about a different religion? Like, how do we distinguish that? If you're watching this and you're like, I just want to make sure I get this straight. And really anybody can jump in, but Matt, you've got a lot of background in this. So anybody who wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I think, what Matt was talking about with the creeds, a difference in religion is a different definition of who God is and a different way of relating to that God. So I think of the big world religions of Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity. They are not the same God, but that go by different names. They are fundamentally different definitions of who God is. And so it's kind of like, if we're having a great conversation, we're talking about Bob, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not sure we're talking about the same Bob. They might have the same name, but they're different people. So when you're talking about religions, you're talking about different gods and different ways of relating to God. When you're talking about within a religion, and this is true, one of the critiques of Christianity is you're so divided. It's actually kind of true. It very much is true of Buddhism and Islam. That there are these different kind of genres or sects or denominations, if we want to use that word, in every world religion. And kind of what Matt was talking about, there's different reasons and those branches within the same tree. They fork at different reasons and at different times, and then they'll fragment further after an initial divide is made. But they still fall within, the Muslim tree is the Muslim tree, the Christian tree is the Christian tree, no matter what branch you're on. And then there are certainly, there's kind of cults or kind of these small, think of Moonies or LDS or Jehovah's Witnesses. Like those are,
I've heard that term a long time.
Different. Those are kind of little sprouts that are growing up. They don't have the historical depth or the long legacy, but they're again different definitions of who God is and different ways of relating to God fundamentally. And those fundamentals are important. Somebody, Brandon, you and I have listened to for a long time, used to say, the critique is of all religions are the same. They're superficially different and fundamentally the same. That's reverse. They're superficially the same. You go to worship, you have these processes, you have these rituals, but they're fundamentally different. And that goes back to that definition of who God is.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Ben, for that. That does help to distinguish it, and I think earlier what Matt was saying about just kind of the creedal approach, where you say, okay, there are these historical statements that the Christian Church has adopted that say this is who God is, this is what God has done, and if you are not willing to adopt those, maybe that's what defines you as a different religion. If you say I can look at a creed, the Apostles' Creed, and I can say I don't agree with this, you're a different religion. Now, if you look at that creed and you say, I agree with this, but there are things that we still disagree on, then we're just talking about denominations. And now it's a different discussion, because now we're really talking, with a brother or sister who we may disagree over a specific, but we can have that conversation as brothers and sisters versus people who are really part of different families entirely. So I want to diagnose the problem for a second. If we're looking at this idea of, and Matt, you kind of talked a little bit about this, how there's history and there's issues that led to the formation of different denominations. But when we talk about kind of denominationalism, where we do this kind of territorialism, this tribalism, this I belong to this and you belong to that, and therefore we can't even talk to each other, what's really the problem here? Let's diagnose the deep level of this issue. As you were saying, Matt, this animosity is what gets in the way of the gospel message. What is the root of that animosity?
If you want to see somebody who's in a really unique place mentally and emotionally, chat with somebody who just bought a timeshare. It's fascinating. No judgment. But what you will find is that everybody's always pretty sure that was a good deal and they got what they wanted. And they're going to explain how everything works to you so that you'll understand it was a good deal. Why? Because they just spent a ton of money on a thing and they're not actually sure themselves that actually made any sense. This might have been a terrible idea. So they just kind of run it again and again because they need to have been right, because they were on vacation and they spent a lot of money on a thing. And now everybody knows they spent a lot of money on that thing. And they don't want to be the butt of the jokes and look stupid because they bought the wrong thing and other people spent their money better. Likewise, when people buy a denomination, that's a whole package. That's the way denominations work right now. I don't think they should. I think denominations should think through what you do with the person who can function in harmony with your statement of faith and your values, but who, as a matter of conscience, maybe just doesn't share all of the same views exactly. But for the most part, you're buying the whole package. And well, if you talk to somebody who's signed up for that whole package, there are various degrees of investment, and we tend to verbally paint ourselves into corners defending the thing that we invested in. And once you've painted yourself into those corners, you got a problem. Or to put it another way, historically, we find that once blood has been shed, that cements a new sprout, a new shoot off of a branch of the Christian family tree. Two groups have a big disagreement, but they don't kill each other. You can put that back together. Two groups have a big disagreement, but they don't go and burn each other down publicly in front of everybody else verbally. That's just like your friendships. You can put that back together. But you go out and shed blood, like literally kill people who you said were wrong about God, or you go out and shed blood metaphorically and just burning other people down verbally. Now you're probably going to get a new offshoot because it's really hard to put that back together. And unfortunately, across all expressions of Christianity historically, that human psychological reality affects the way we think about our theology and our ability to be conciliatory and decent toward people who might not share the same theology. We feel that that parting of ways was so severe sometimes that we have to have been right. Look at what we did. If we were wrong and we discover that now, we can't be wrong. I mean, what do? Go back and apologize? And like, oh, sorry, like those seemed like good
sorry I killed you for that,
really
but
wrong. But
okay.
Once that blood gets shed, and this is not just Christianity, this is humanity across the board, divisions tend to become pretty entrenched. I get that. I think there's another place where blood has been shed that can undo that. And that, of course, is the cross. There is a grace, there is a forgiveness, there is a power in his work on the cross that nothing else compares to. So in that case, blood got shed, and it's the thing that brings about reconciliation. That's the exact opposite of human history. And so as Christians, there's an opportunity to lean into that. But your question was, why do we get crossways with each other? Well, I think that's part of it. We tend to get a little hot as humans when we part ways with somebody else over ideas, and it can be really hard to put that back together. Then you get to the second point of why the division is difficult. You start to gerrymander ideas a little bit around whatever caused that division in the first place. And you put together, because all humans desire cohesiveness, you put together a cohesive theological formula that is always going to have a few points of friction, but that you can square with the Bible and church history. And it's Christian. It works. It's a new functional, internally cohesive Christian expression. But then you forget that there might also be other internally cohesive expressions of Christianity that fall within the boundaries of orthodoxy as well. When you run into those other ones, it can be kind of threatening and kind of jarring at first. If you can be patient and kind of get past that, then all of a sudden it becomes fun and exhilarating because you're like, wait a minute. There are other expressions of this thing that are orthodox and that are Christ-centered and that have all the stuff about like the Bible and the basics of salvation right. And they just don't look like me. That's amazing. It means I don't have the market cornered on this, and God is bigger than me and my little enclave. That's actually really encouraging. But at the front end, it can be a little bit of a hurdle.
Yeah, you know, Matt, I experienced that just this last summer when I went to my first doctorate residency with in a school at a different denomination than my own, and it was like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by people who we all agree on. I mean, 99% of this stuff. We have some disagreements here, but man, we're able to minister to each other with the gospel, and suddenly it just felt like I can hear your way of ministering with the gospel as different, but still beautiful. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that those disagreements, I mean, that I don't think they matter. I think they do, but we can actually talk about it because I can respect you, and you're not the enemy. You're my brother, and now I can talk about it with you. Now, I want to pick on our intern for a second because I want to see if she knows. When I asked this question, one thought that went through my head, and I'm going to ask her to read my mind because that's what interns are supposed to be able to do.
Every week you've got Ashley on here like, Ashley, please read my mind.
Please read my mind. But I think she should know this answer because there's a saying in the program she's in, which I went through as well, and I'm pretty sure it's the saying because of me because I always said it. So let's see if she's got it. What's the problem, Ashley?
I think her video's frozen.
just freeze. Ashley.
Just freeze, Ashley. That's right. We're gonna make Brandon finish his own thought there since he's got hardly anything for you to go on.
Well, whenever there's a problem in our lives, the answer is usually.
Please tell me it's sin. Please tell me
it's sin. It's sin. The answer is sin, right? Sin is a problem for us as human beings. And I think the fact that denominationalism, the idea of this tribalism that we draw the lines and we say, you're the enemy if you're on the other side of it, is a symptom of sin in our lives. And Matt, I love that you went to the cross, because that's the point, right? Is that sin, when it shows up in our lives, and especially when it shows up in the church, it shows up as defeating or trying to defeat the love that Jesus said is the mark of what his disciples are about. Mm-hmm. And so the solution to that is to always go back to the cross and say, look, Jesus is bleeding all over all of us there to wash us of this sin. And so when we stand there together, we can't, I mean, if I'm standing next to my Baptist friend and my Presbyterian friend and my Anglican friend, and we're all standing at the foot of the cross and Jesus is bleeding all over us to wash us of our sins, we don't sit there and go, yeah, but you still got things wrong, man. All right. Okay. I don't know if I can stand next to you. No, we just say, you know what? Oh, praise God. And maybe we go and we have a meal and then we talk about our different understandings of what he had to say. But we do that as friends who are blood-bought people of God. We belong to him because he bought us with his blood. Let's not, sit there and hold each other at arm's length all the time.
The result of sin is that we often feel like we are right over everybody else, no matter what church you're in. I mean, it can apply to our career. If I work for Ford, I'm cooler than the people who work for GM. If I work at Chick-fil-A, I'm cooler than the people who work at McDonald's.
Careful what you say there about Chick-fil-A.
I said Chick-fil-A people thought they were cooler.
I don't know. I just heard on a Babylon Bee podcast somebody got really upset because Babylon Bee made fun of Chick-fil-A. So watch out, Mike. Watch out.
I'm just saying we're
gonna lose viewers all over the place here.
That was the divisive statement of the whole hour. Well, I think, Brandon, what you're saying, there are wrong ways to approach these differences. Burning at the stake, wrong way to approach the difference, whether metaphorical or literal. Pretending like they don't exist is another wrong way to approach them.
Right.
I was just watching a YouTube from, actually not Matt, but another guy that I follow, talking about how, his I think he's Baptist, but he can get along better with somebody kind of who knows, and he actually used Lutheran, who studied deeply Lutheranism, who knows Lutheranism. He can get along better with them than he can with somebody who kind of just has bought into it and hasn't studied it or dug into it. And I think his point, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my takeaway was, when you start to understand, and this is what Matt was talking about, when you start to understand why somebody thinks differently, or why somebody is of this different heritage, why somebody is in this different branch, and you kind of go through the process of empathizing, and you're able to say, I don't agree with you, but I get it. I understand where you're coming from, and I understand why you came to that conclusion. You get away from kind of the polarized antagonism and into this this peace where you can have those conversations, because the doctrine does matter. The truth, the differences do matter, and if you erase them, it doesn't solve the person who walks into Christianity or gets introduced to Christianity is like, you don't have different names, but you're saying different things. That presents an equal challenge. But to be able to come at it and say, here's why I say what I say. I understand why you say what you say. I understand why you believe what you believe. We can have dialogue around that. We don't need a diatribe. We don't need a burning at the stake event. We don't need a big conference of the whole church to understand that maybe sometimes we're talking past each other. Matt alluded to that. Sometimes it's just different nomenclature. Sometimes it's little minutia that make a big difference. And to have that honest dialogue with people that's knowledgeable and empathetic, I think those two have to come together.
Mm-hmm. Good thoughts, Ben. I appreciate that. Matt, I want to turn a little bit to just what led us to ask you in the first place was the fact that you did a series of videos where you actually talked to people from different denominations. I think the first time I ever saw you was because somebody shared to me a video of you meeting a Lutheran pastor. And I think he was from the Missouri Synod, and I actually grew up in the Missouri Synod. My grandpa was a Missouri Synod pastor, and so I was really interested in this. I think it was actually my cousin who shared it to me, I just thought, wow, I really appreciate a guy who's going to go and just super respectfully say, well, just show me what you believe. I loved that about that. And then I kind of started following some of your other stuff. So I want to ask first, what led you to decide to do that? Like, why did you say, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm just going to kind of be an outsider here and ask questions of people?
Because I thought it would have a lot of upside and do a lot of good, and it's not hard. It's just one of these
That's
things
a really good answer.
Like, I don't know. You find someone nice. You go to their church. You tell them you're going to bring a camera when you come, and you're like, I'm going to ask you a lot of things. I'll probably edit out some of your answers for time, but I just want to point at the things and ask what they do. How come it's like that? And I think we'll probably learn a ton about each other. And again, if I can see the cohesiveness of somebody else's tradition and let them just in their own words explain why, I always come away feeling better about it. There've been a couple of videos where I went and met with somebody and I thought, oh, well, it's not cohesive. Y'all don't know what you think right now. Okay. Well, that happens too. Okay. And you try to put lipstick on it and, make sure everybody comes away feeling all right and looking good. But the reality is it's not always cohesive, but usually there's a dang good reason that people think what they think. And there's a reason that they got there. And there's a reason that it's hard to make the pivots that need to be made right now. And by that, I don't mean changing theology. I just mean being what we need to be in order to get the message in front of people right now. So I think the reason beyond that I wanted to give that a try was that I'd heard a lot of things about what other people believed in my studies from people who weren't that thing. Everything I knew about Catholicism, I learned from Protestants. And everything I learned about other versions of Protestants, I learned from people who were my version of Protestant. And I don't even know who brought up Anglicanism. Is that even still a thing? Like, do they do that? I've heard that was a big deal. Like, I don't know any Anglicans, or I didn't back then. So how do you learn about Anglicanism? Go talk to somebody who doesn't like them very much, or somebody who used to be an Anglican and is grouchy? Why don't I go talk to somebody who loves being an Anglican and maybe even leads a church? I bet you're going to learn some stuff. And it was incredible just to see people best foot forward about what this stuff looks like on its most beautiful day. And I thought Will Whedon from the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church is a great example of what that looks like. And no one I've talked to has gotten weird or fussy because I'm like, oh, that's not what my tradition believes. Why do you guys do it that way? Instead of being just appalled that someone wouldn't think their thing. Like, everybody's responded like a human, because intuitively, unless we're on the internet and typing comments, we all intuitively know that other people don't think the same thing as us because we're different. This is self-evident, right? But somehow that basic empathetic capacity just goes away when we start tweeting things. And so I don't know. I guess I just wanted to know. I was genuinely curious. How does Orthodoxy work? What's the difference between that kind of Lutheran and this other kind of Lutheran over there? And it is incredible how willing people are to talk about a thing that they love and care deeply about if you ask. So I guess that's kind of why.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And I'm kind of curious now, like, through all those conversations with people from different denominations, is there something that was like really unique to you? You're like, I have never heard of a Christian doing that, but that is really cool or really strange or really just like surprised you. You weren't expecting, you're standing there with a camera and a microphone and this person says, yeah, we do this. And you were like, I'm not sure how to respond right now because you told me something that I just was not expecting.
Like any good interviewer, hopefully you have some sense of the answers to the questions that you are asking before you ask them. But
no, this is wide open, man. Just give me
certainly. No. I meant that from my perspective when I go in.
Oh, gotcha.
So yeah, I feel like I got like at least a zip code as to where they're going to come from. I think the questions that are most interesting to people are the ones that you'd be afraid to ask. Like, okay, so that's a relic of Mary Magdalene. How do you know? Well, it is. Right. But is there like some kind of provenance, like a sheet of paper that explains it? Like, had you DNA? Like, how do you know that that's what it is? Who had it before you? And so some folks are going to hear a question like that and be maybe a little bit defensive. The people I've asked that of, their answer was just, well, it is. Oh, okay, that's cool. So it's interesting when you hit those pressure moments with another group that it was founded by a prophetess, and that historically has kind of been right on the edge of creedal Christianity. I got to asking them, like, well, what if your prophetess disagrees with the Bible? Oh, she doesn't. Well, it kind of looks like she does here, here, and here. Well, she changed. Oh, okay. So did she predict the future, and was she right? Well, she did, but she was wrong. Okay. Well, then why do you need her? And that moment should have been really awkward and tense between us. But to the credit of the people I was talking to, it wasn't. They know it's a valid question. They know. They've thought about it. This has occurred to them before. And I didn't find their answer to be satisfying, but I found it to be human and reasonable and an honest reflection of what they think and what they believe. And that's what I was there to figure out, not to be the final arbiter of, are you a Christian or not? Do you pass the test of me? Because I'm not in charge of anything. I was there to find out, just like, what do you do with stuff like this? What do you make of that? What do you tell people when they raise these questions? How do you find internal cohesion with these particular things? And for the most part, yeah, everybody's thought about it. So yeah, I've had some moments like that. There have been a couple that I haven't been able to publish because I was so astonished that somebody would say that into a running camera on purpose. Like, just, oh, dude, like, that's the end of your career. I'll finish this out just so it doesn't feel weird, but I'm never publishing that, just as a professional courtesy. Wow. That's not, like, you just divorced your entire denomination from historical creedal Christianity. Do you know that you did that? Oh man. Wow. I have a thing I have to do. Well, we're only 6 minutes into the interview. Yeah. It just came up. Like, I don't know. It's awkward when that happens, but for all the places I've gone, for that to only have happened a couple of times where I just felt I couldn't, I mean, I just can't publish that. If that's what you think, you can think that. I'm not going to be the guy who outs you for thinking that. 19 out of 20 of these visits have just been, I've found an astonishing amounts of common cause with the people I've met with.
Matt, we've got a question in the Facebook chat asking, this is from Luke, who do you contact to visit churches? I've seen you travel around the U.S. Do you throw a dart to go somewhere? How do you figure out where to go and who to talk to? Yeah,
that's a great question. It depends. Every now and then I pick based on the building, because YouTube's a visual medium, and if the building is boring, people are less likely to watch. And that sounds mean. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a boring building. As a Protestant, I actually think there's a certain value to plain worship in the Reformed tradition. I see why that group does it that way. But I also know that if I walk in and it looks like my dumb editing office here with tan walls and cheesy 70s paneling, like, it's just not visually interesting. It doesn't compel the viewer to want to ask more questions and hang in. Whereas if I can go somewhere that is visually compelling, that alone tells a story. That alone speaks about theology and raises questions. It's easier to interview. It's easier to invite people along to come and watch. So a lot of times I pick by the building. Other times I will just call a denomination and be like, hey, who would be the best person you have to do this? That's what happened with the Missouri Synod Lutherans. Like, who's your very, 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 very best? And their social media guy connected me with Will Whedon. He was awesome. Other times, this is a little nuts. Other times we're just passing through a town and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like rubbernecking at churches, like guys at the beach do with ladies. Like, oh yeah. And I want to see what's going on inside that church. And so sometimes I just go and knock on the door. I'm like, hey, I did stuff on YouTube or whatever. Can I just look at your church? Because it looks neat. Would you mind telling me about it? And sometimes people are threatened by that. Other times people are like, yes, but I'm giving you nothing. Other times people are like, hey, I saw your thing with the thing or whatever. Do you want to just do one? I'm like, I mean, there's a reason I carry all of this gear with me everywhere I go. I mean, yeah, if you got a minute. And
you just have like a backpack full of audio and video equipment. Is that what you're telling me? You're just like, everywhere you go, Everywhere you go, you're just like, I am ready to do an interview, ready to do a shoot.
Yeah.
Do it now.
Yeah, exactly like that, because the most human stuff happens when nobody was planning for it. You catch somebody, you see something beautiful in the moment. Everything I'm saying is completely authentic because I'm struck by the beauty and the moment and the human connection right now. And the person I'm talking to is in the same place. Sometimes when you give it months and months and months for people to get all amped up and nerved up and ask other people questions and get the defenses up, you get good stuff, but you don't get the human connection in the same way. So nope, sometimes I just roll up on a church and ask real nice and see what happens, and that's worked as well. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose I can go on and on about that process, but I suppose there's a lot of ways that I trick people into doing these videos with me.
Matt, have you gone in based on the church sign and what it said?
I have not gone in based on the church sign and what it said. I mean, look, it doesn't do me any good to go and point a camera at dumb Christian things. And there are some very significant dumb Christian things that I spent a lot of money and time to go point a camera at. And it was just awful. Like it didn't make the thing look good. And okay, like if that's what you wanted to do and that's what you wanted to build and that's how you wanted to talk about people who aren't Christians yet, I mean, whatever. I'm not the king of anything, but I'm not publishing this video. And so, no, like I want people to become Christians, man. Like I think this is the truest, realest thing in the history of ever. And I'm not going to compel people to do it or force them to do it. I don't want the government to make people do it. But I think it's so winsome and so true if you just see it in its native environment and you see people who have rightly internalized the values of the gospel and the kingdom. I mean, you don't need to sign up for my version of Christianity. I just hope you become a Christian. And so even if I go to something I don't like very much as an expression of Christianity, and I can tell it's going to make the whole thing look ugly and bad, I just hit the abort button and we don't do it. And there's no point in dragging anybody through the mud or making things look any less awesome than they actually are.
I think in some ways, Matt, that shows a lot of respect for kind of the body of believers, because you're recognizing that sometimes there are warts and it doesn't help the body to say, let's zoom in on those, right? It helps the body the most when we say, what is the beauty of the body of Christ? And we have just a few minutes left. And so I want to kind of wrap up by asking you, based on everything that you've spent time learning from other people, and both in those kind of those interview interactions, but also just in your interactions with people on your Reddit board and through your videos and stuff, what would you say is a blessing of belonging to a specific tradition? Like, you know, we're Lutherans. Why should people who belong to a Lutheran church say, this is good that I belong to this? What is the blessing I find with choosing a denomination and sticking with it?
Because nobody's good at everything and everybody's good at something. I recently hung out with the mucky mucks of your sibling denomination, the Missouri Synod crowd. They're really good at some stuff, but not everything. That's okay. Catholics are real good at some stuff, but not everything. You trade something off when you go with a hierarchy structure. Presbyterians are really, really good at the beacon of truth and thinking really hard and doing deep water theology, but they're not good at everything. The Pentecostal church that I visited in, in Springfield, Missouri, amazing, good at so much stuff, but not everything. My church, it's not good at everything. Me, I'm not good at everything. It's almost as though you could liken Christianity to a body that has all of these different parts.
Imagine that.
Wait a second.
That sounded
I'm
familiar.
spitballing this. I'm trying it out.
Just
If
off
I
the top of my
embarrass
head.
myself here, I mean, no, it's a reason that's the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Because we're all good at stuff and we're all bad at stuff and we're all medium at stuff, which means we need each other. I asked, I'm going to say this here. I know you need to wrap up. I asked a group of Christian leaders a while back in a room, and these Christian leaders were not very sure what to make of me and were a little bit uncomfortable with where I was taking the conversation. That was on purpose. But I asked them a question. Like, hey, if I put a red button in front of you, it was a magic red button, and you could push that red button and you would make all of the heretics just go away and become Christians, would you push it? Just go ahead and make the sound on the table. The whole room pushes the button. Of course. What if you guys could make all the Catholics into your version of Protestantism? Most people push the button. I was like, all right, let's go one further. What if you could push the button and every single version of Christianity that isn't you would immediately go away, be forgotten to history, and the entire Christian enterprise would hinge on you and exactly what you are? Nobody pushed the button.
Right.
So we all know dang well when we're pressed that we're not good at everything and we need each other. And so why you should be proud of the fact that you're a Lutheran is, well, you're a part of one of the many stories. The existence of Lutheranism is one of many stories that demonstrate the infinite translatability of the gospel. And if the gospel can make that beautiful thing out of that story, that people group, that moment in history, well, then that's one more bit of evidence that says it can make beautiful things out of a whole bunch of other stories. Big stories, little stories, people who are completely broken. So that's part of the reason you should be proud of it. Another part of the reason is you're good at stuff that other people aren't good at. Another part of the reason is you will never happen again. There will never be another Lutheranism because of the unique pressures that happened right there in that moment. And there's something very beautiful about you as a time capsule, a living time capsule, that says, hey, this is what the gospel did. This is what God did in his church when these pressures that were a singular moment in time happened. And if you go away or just become a generic version of everything else, just like everybody else, so we can feel better and not have friction, then we lose that living reminder of what God did through that moment and through those pressures. So I could go on, but I know we're tight on time. The reality is that there are things that are uniquely beautiful about what each of these different groups of Christians are, and that are unique contributions that we make really well, and unique weaknesses where we specifically need exactly this other group from the opposite side of the Christian family tree to pick up our slack, because we're never going to be good at that or get it right. And so I need Lutherans, because you give me a sense of what Protestantism looks like when it still invests tremendous energy in pointing to all of the ways that we are descended from everything that Christianity did up until 1517. And if you go away and get absorbed into generic evangelicalism, well, then this whole thing just feels like this totally brand new thing that we just made out of thin air. You are connective tissue that reminds us that we're all a part of the historical body of Christ. And this is what it looks like when that is practiced today. I think that in itself is a super important thing.
Wow. That's really beautiful, Matt. And I really appreciate that. With the last couple of minutes we have here, what I want to do is give kind of everybody who's in this conversation a chance maybe just to reflect a little bit on, as I said, 80% of our viewers or so are Lutheran already. And those of you who kind of fit into that other group who are like, hey, I'm not Lutheran, but I'm watching this anyway, or I'm not even Christian, but my friend shared this and I'm watching this because I'm interested. Thanks for being here. What we want to do is maybe just give each person around the table like 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe. What is a way that we can grow deeper in our faith? Like, let's just say, like, based on this question and how we've gotten some answers to it, what can I do personally that says, hey, this is going to enrich me? Ben, what's doing in your brain?
Yeah, I think it's just that I appreciate Matt kind of giving voice to that attitude of curiosity and humble curious, not the kind of thing that says, I'm curious what you are so that I can just pound you into the ground, but asking questions and being open and not leading questions, but the kind of questions like, tell me about that, or this is, some of my most fruitful conversations. We used to live in LDS territory. My most fruitful conversations with LDS missionaries is, hey, I've heard this. I'm trying to learn about Mormonism. I've heard this about Mormonism. Is that true? Help me understand how you come at that question. And have an attitude that goes and asks those questions, have a heart that's humble enough to hear the answers and to ponder them instead of jumping on, oh, you used the wrong word there, or that's not how I would put it. Sometimes you got to ask yourself, are we saying the same thing just in different ways? And that takes some reflection. It takes some depth. It takes some understanding and patience to get there. So come at it with a kind of a long view. This is going to take me a while to kind of figure this out and dig deeply and know know what it is I believe, why I believe it, and why it's different than maybe somebody else, and why I can be okay with that.
I like that. Mike, what are you thinking about?
I think sometimes the person who doesn't have their denomination or their belief and they're trying to find it poses the question, why can't we all just get along and agree with each other on everything and live in harmony? And there's value to your heritage, your culture, your denomination, and to experience that, to learn more about it, and to be proud of it. And so listen to other people, learn from other people, learn from other denominations, and ask questions. But at the same time, there's so much value in firmly believing what you believe, standing true to that, and still loving others and listening.
Nice. Ashley, what are you thinking about?
So this phrase that I learned or heard about during one of my communication classes is seek to understand, then to be understood. So with whatever conversations you're having, especially when it comes to something like religion, I'm one of those type of people that I like to understand why people think the way they do and how they got to that type of conclusion. So especially with something like religion, going to that question of okay, why do you believe that way? Obviously, with the best intentions behind that question, and really looking at how they came to that conclusion. And in some of my experiences, that's led me to understand my own faith better and understand my own religion and why my church teaches what it does.
That's great.
She's been part of St. Mark listening to Pastor.
Sorry, Mike, that was a little quiet. Say that again.
I said, I feel like Ashley's been part of St. Mark for a while listening to Pastor Parlow. Why is it that how do you believe that?
Yeah. She's picking things up very fast. I'm glad she's on our staff for these few months here. I'm going to let Matt have the last word, but I'm just going to share my own thought, which is similar to Ashley's. But I've heard it said that, tradition is the answer to questions we forgot how to ask. And a lot of times the tradition that you belong to may be answering questions that you didn't know needed to be asked. And I think the value of exploring what other traditions believe is because they are also answering questions that you didn't know you needed to ask. And so that's where, if you want to grow deeper in your faith, is look at those traditions and say, maybe they're actually trying to answer something that needs to be answered. Maybe they're meeting a need that I didn't know I had. And I found that when I've engaged in maybe worship or prayer practices that come from other traditions that aren't typical in the Lutheran Church, I found that they meet a need in my soul that I didn't know I had until I spent a little bit of time exploring them. So if you want to grow deeper in your faith with this subject especially, spend a little bit of time just looking at those. And just for 30 seconds, I want to give a really interesting example that from the Eastern Orthodox, they have this tradition where they do this thing that's called, I don't remember what it's called now. It's this kind of prayer where you actually don't pray words, but what you do, it's just this you kind of start with praying words, but then you get to a point where you're just not even praying words. You're just open to God and saying, God, just stare into my soul and see what's there. And when I've practiced that, it's like there's this peace that flows from that moment of knowing God sees me completely and he still loves me. And he knows me better than I know myself, and that's okay. So when you start to learn those traditions, those practices, like I said, it answers questions you didn't know you had. It's a good thing. So Matt, last word.
As I travel around and get to know people from different denominations, what I'm finding is two things. One, denominations do not at their core have the interest, the time, the motivation, or even the mechanisms to make church unity happen. They're trying to keep their little branch together, and that's exactly what those home offices need to be doing. But individuals often imagine that somebody at the home office is solving the church unity thing. And they're going to work it out. There'll be a meeting someday, and then we'll be unified, and they'll tell us. It's not happening. It's not coming. If we want church unity and we believe that Jesus said do it and that he said pray for it, we have to do it. Individual Christians have to choose Christian unity with other Christians from different traditions. I have 4 ways quickly that I think we do that. 1, we open the word together, not to argue, but just see what it says and just read and hang out with God because we think the Bible is from him. 2, we celebrate baptism together, even if we don't exactly agree on what it means. Hey, somebody is following Jesus in baptism as best as they understand it. That's something we should show up for and be excited about. 3, we got to find a way to share the table together. I know not all churches will even allow that. I get it. I understand where they're coming from. But if we wait until we all agree on exactly what the Lord's table means, we're never going to take communion with the majority of other Christians. That's no good. Baptism and the Lord's table were 2 gifts from God that were meant to bring us together. And for too long, they've been used to divide us. We have to recapture those things, celebrate the table and baptism together, read the word together. And then the 4th thing is we just need to think about each other differently. I got deeply held convictions. There's a reason that I have them and the reason that I think the stuff I think. I need to empathetically assume that the same is true of you. And that while surely we're both wrong about some stuff, but we just don't know which stuff we're wrong about. So this ethic of giving the other people the benefit of the doubt that they're on a journey of faith, just like us, that they care about what the Word of God says, just like us, that they're a part of a tradition with unique histories and pressures, just like their denomination, just like any individual, it's an empathetic mentality that we've starved ourselves of, I think, for too long. And when we see each other the way Christ sees people, as image bearers, as people in need of redemption, as people who are kingdom agents and have a role to play and value to bring to this whole kingdom enterprise, our hearts, I think, are a little bit softer, and it's easier to be at peace with the idea that others might hold some different convictions and to figure out ways to move forward and do loving Christian unity that is a witness for Christ to the world together.
Matt, thank you so much for your thoughts there. And I wish we had another hour to talk because we definitely could. As you know, I sent you probably another hour's worth of questions that we didn't even touch on. And I would love to, but we were out of time. No, it's all good. I'm so glad that you joined us for this conversation. As I said, I think as Ben said, a lot of people we know have followed your podcast and your YouTube videos and greatly appreciate them. You are doing some amazing work, and we just really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to talk to us here in our little corner of the kingdom of God. So thanks for being here. All of those who are watching with us, thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you being here. We would really ask that if this conversation was helpful to you, please share, like, comment. If it was helpful to you, it's going to be helpful to somebody else. We also have a Facebook group. It's just called Pub Theology. And it used to be called Pub Theology, Big Questions, Biblical Answers. We actually got rid of that tagline, so it's just called Pub Theology. But if you look for that online, and Ben has dropped the link into the chat, if you click on that, we'd love to have you join that Facebook group so that we can keep interacting with you. If you ask questions on the comments on this video, we'll try and get back to you over the course of this next week. So please do join us there. And finally, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be having a conversation with somebody about repentance. I think actually he's kind of said he's interested, so I think maybe I can name him. It's Dr. Ben Coles, who is a Christian psychologist and counselor who has spent a lot of time helping people live in repentance and walk out that walk of turning away from their sin and turning towards their Savior. And looking forward to the conversation, especially as we look forward to the season of Lent, a time of repentance, a great tradition in the Christian church to turn our eyes to Jesus. So we hope that you'll join us for that conversation in 2 weeks. In the meantime, once again, thank you, Matt, for joining us. Thank you, everybody online, for joining us. Have a great evening.